So we turn to our next panel.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this
Which,
conversation.
yeah, I'm excited as well. It's a conversation about newsroom equity, representation, and accountability with the Journalism Accountability Watchdog Network, the JAWN Coalition. And this coalition has been challenging the Philadelphia Inquirer to hire journalists of color and create more diverse and equitable newsrooms. So thank you for that important work. To speak more on this effort, we're joined by our speakers, Tauhid Chappell, Program Manager at Free Press, Ernest Owens, President of the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists, Jingyao Yu, President of the Philadelphia Chapter of Asian American Journalists Association, and Vanessa Graber, President of the Philadelphia Chapter of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. Thank you all for joining us today.
I don't see Tauhid yet, but I will add him on screen as soon as he joins, but feel free to take it away.
Thank you. We're super excited to be here this afternoon. It's been a very exciting and interesting week for us, as you all can imagine, based on, social media and all of the attention we've gotten. But we are super excited to be able to be here today to discuss our formation and how we became and what we've been working on. And, I'll briefly introduce myself, and I know Vanessa and Jingyao will also do the same. So I'm Ernest Owens. I'm the president of the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists. I'm based in Philadelphia, and I'm the editor-at-large for Philadelphia Magazine here in Philly. I've been in the media advocacy space for 10 years. I'm 31, but I started very early and have had the pleasure of being the board chairman of Philly Cam. I've done a lot of work with public access media, local media, and national journalism. I serve on the board of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences Mid-Atlantic chapter. That's the group who give out the Emmys regionally. And I've done a lot of other work, just pushing for diversity, equity, inclusion across the board. So coming to JAWN and forming this coalition with the rest of these esteemed affinity group leaders was a no-brainer for me as I begin my second term as president of PABJ. And it's been, a really important time to have these conversations and demand more, to be quite honest. So I'm super excited. And of course, PABJ is the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists, which is the nation's oldest association of Black journalists that predates NABJ. We were founded in 1973, NABJ was founded in 1975, and our founding members were a part of the founders of NABJ. So diversity, equity, inclusion, and the fight for it started in Philadelphia with Black journalists like Asa Moore and Chuck Stone and others. So I just wanted to make sure that was known as well.
Hey, I'm Vanessa Maria Graber. I'm the Philly chapter president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. I also work at Free Press as the director of the News Voices program. And in that role, I also am the co-facilitator along with Simon Galprin of the New Jersey Community Media Collective. News Voices has several projects to engage the community with journalists on a variety of issues, including serving communities of color, serving poor people, and addressing people's information needs. In Philadelphia, we have a project called Shift the Narrative that is in partnership with our allies at the Movement Alliance Project and Penn's Media Inequality and Change Center. And it was through that project, Shift the Narrative, which aims to end the crime beat in Philadelphia, that we first started working with the Philadelphia Inquirer and building a strategy around newsroom accountability. So I will let my colleague Tauhid talk more about that, since he is the project manager for Free Press and their Shift the Narrative project. But NAHJ Philly has been working with Free Press and AAJA and PABJ for 2.5 years, ever since the Inquirer's Building Matters 2 headline came out, and shortly after, journalists of color did a sick out demanding change and accountability from the leadership. And so that's the first time that our organization started collaborating and started working together ever since. And not just with the Inquirer, but having many conversations and meetings with newsroom leaders across the region about how to not just hire people of color, but retain them and provide safe working environments for them to thrive. So I'm gonna pass it to Jingyao to introduce herself, and then Tauhid's gonna give an overview of the JAWN Coalition and how it came about.
Thanks, Vanessa. Hi, folks. I'm Jingyao Yu, she, hers. I'm the president of the Philadelphia chapter of Asian American Journalists Association. Outside of that, I am the program manager of our community engagement team at Resolve Philly, also based in Philadelphia. And folks may be familiar with the Newsroom Collaborative initiative that Resolve leads currently called Broken Philly. Where we work with 26 local newsrooms around collaborative reporting that are rooted in solutions reporting, as well as community voices. My background is not in journalism, it's in public health and immigrant nonprofit. But I'll just say, think a lot about what does community building mean within communities and across various communities of shared experiences and who are all impacted by system inequities. So I'll leave it there and pass it to Tauhid.
Hey everybody, my name is Tauhid Chappell, pronouns he, him. I am the program manager for Free Press, focusing on shifting narratives around crime, police, and the criminal legal system. So I'm just gonna share my screen real quick, and I'm gonna give a very brief overview about how the Journalism Accountability Watchdog Network came to be. I think it's really important to talk about the history of how this all came to be. So I'm going to start as to why we're here, how JAWN came to be. So Vanessa might have mentioned, or it might have been mentioned here earlier, that in 2020, the Philadelphia Inquirer published Buildings Matter 2. There was massive public backlash to the headline. There was journalists doing their sick out. The Inquirer sent a memo internally, which was shared around the media ecosystem, vowing to become an anti-racist institution and looking at its internal processes to make sure that a egregious headline and story that really undermined the values of Black lives never came to be again. And so they decided that they wanted to become an anti-racist institution. What does that mean? During this time, as the Inquirer was looking internally, it hired Temple University to do a diversity and inclusion audit, which I highly recommend. If you have not seen this or read it, look up the 2020 Diversity and Inclusion Audit by Temple University. They found that, not surprisingly, the newsroom is predominantly white, which is covering a community that's predominantly Black, and that the teams that were working on it were not only using sources that were predominantly white, they had very little diversity among its ranks of journalists of color, particularly Black journalists. And so the Temple University audit came out with a bunch of recommendations, building relationships with different communities, organizing external advisory groups to hold the Inquirer accountable, and then building a culture of accountability internally and externally to discuss and showcase the public how the Inquirer was actually going to shift to become an anti-racist institution and actually create information that meets information needs from Black and brown communities. Well, it's been a couple years since the Building Matters 2 headline has happened, and there's been a bunch of things that the Inquirer hasn't done. It hasn't been public about its ongoing DEI efforts. It hasn't created any sort of outside advisory groups to help shift it into an anti-racist institution. We have seen, all of our organizations have seen a plethora of journalists of color leave the Inquirer. It has not diversified its management whatsoever, nor has it publicized any sort of policies internally or externally that makes it an anti-racist institution, nor has the Inquirer actually been able to uphold or even address any of the journalists of color, current and prior, demands in order to change its internal culture. So the Inquirer really hasn't done too much following its Buildings Matter 2 headline in 2020. And so, taking all this into account, PABJ, AAJA Philly, NAHJ Philly, and Free Press came together to do this call to action. Most recently, the Inquirer found itself with 0 Black news male reporters outside the sports section. They just hired 1 Black male news reporter most recently, but following the fact that they had 0 Black male news reporters within the newsroom, within the entire newsroom outside the sports desk, that was a really big critical issue for us. And so we all came together, wrote this statement demanding accountability and demanding a meeting with the Inquirer leadership to talk about how can we diversify the newsroom, how can the Inquirer actually be held accountable to be an anti-racist institution, and how can it be more transparent and be held accountable for the coverage that continuously impacts Black and Brown community members. And so I'll stop there and I'll actually pass it to Ernest to talk a little bit about how the Inquirer's response has been since we came together as JAWN.
Absolutely. And I think, thank you for that, Tauhid. I think, you know, to be clear, oftentimes when Black and Brown and Asian journalists collaborate together on issues and take initiatives, people always ask the question of, well, why did it go this far? Couldn't it have been a conversation at the table? Couldn't they have just sit this out without going public and going on social media? And the point I want to be clear is that we have been doing this for years. You know, PABJ has been having the backdoor meetings, have been having the email requests, has been doing everything on our end to try to have these conversations before things went public. It's not easy for any of us as Black, Hispanic, or Asian journalists to be putting ourselves and our reputations and ourselves out there in this way to be visible. But unfortunately, the calls for DEI demands of it because there has been a continuation of neglect and mismanagement from the Philadelphia Inquirer when it comes to addressing these issues in a very more civil, formal way. So, you know, the timeline for us really starts back to 2020, even before that. I mean, the history of PABJ and the Inquirer goes back to our founding in the 1970s. So this is an issue that has been going on for 50 years. And presidents before me didn't have the benefit of social media or digital technology in some cases to be able to advance this cause. And we also did not have the strong presence of other affinity groups to help us build a strong coalition. And so what we are today is that we realized that we were having similar issues. We were having the same types of promises made but not kept. And a lot of those issues has been harmful. So to answer the question from Stefanie, the Inquirer has not necessarily responded to JAWN recently. They haven't. And it's become really frustrating because we have consistently reached out to them. So what has happened lately was that when we saw that there was not one single Black male reporter outside the sports desk, no longer at the Inquirer, Mensa Dean in the early summer, that was a moment where we said, we need to take a step to say, where have the Inquirer been on any of our MODs or any of the promises made to us? And so we got together, we sent an open letter to the Inquirer asking them, we wanted to meet with the publisher, we wanted to meet with the managing editor and the executive editor. And you know, that letter has been public. You can find it at the Free Press. You can find it on AAJA's website and PABJ's website. It's very public, and we were very clear about our concerns and about the promises that were made to us previously, agreements that we had, meetings that we had that were we assumed at the time, fruitful. And what we got instead was no response. The publisher, Lisa Hughes, had put out a letter to the staff that also went public, pretty much gaslighting our actions, referring to us as outside voices, really framing us and othering us in a way that dehumanized our work, minimized our impact, and really lied about our intentions and what we were trying to do. And that really made us realize that these are not good faith actors, that these were not mistakes, that these were targeted, deliberate and calculated moves made on them to basically separate affinity groups from being a part of their DEI initiatives. I mean, at the end of the day, the real conflict here is that the Inquirer wants to shape and design their own branding around diversity, equity, inclusion without the input of community, without the input of affinity groups. And, you know, corporations across the country have tried to do this in other places where they want to control their narrative. They want to say they're an anti-racist institution without holding themselves accountable to being an anti-racist institution. They want to say these words that make them look good and make them look favorable without actually having community input to question and challenge that. And so they have consistently, we've seen a mass exodus of Black employees. We've seen a mass exodus of Latino voices that were very critical to community reporting. We've seen a lot of shifts without input. And so one of the things that has happened since then is that JAWN has, you know, continued to have meetings with our members. We've gotten feedback to figure out what accountability looks like and how we can advocate for them in a situation where we're being pretty much locked out. And we began to realize that there was starting to be really fractured ways that the Inquirer wanted to engage us. The DEI director, Kendra Lee, reached out to the National Hispanic Journalists Association, Philly president Vanessa, reached out to Jingyao from Asian journalists, and reached out to them, both of them, to have a meeting individually. Vanessa didn't do the meeting, Jingyao did. I had to beg for a meeting because I wasn't offered a formal meeting. And when I had the meeting with them, they pretty much, it was with Kendra, it was not with the executive editor, which is what we requested. It wasn't with Lisa, the publisher, who we requested. It was with her, and we were just simply told what the Inquirer was doing on their DI front, but I wasn't given an opportunity to really challenge the letter. I wasn't given an opportunity to really discuss the real issues on the table and the grievances that we were hearing from our members. And so the conversation really didn't go anywhere. It actually ended really abruptly for myself. And I think what has been really frustrating is that we have been very clear on what we want. And what we really want is a conversation. We want a meeting. We want to know, you know, what happens to the promises and agreements that we did agree on. Like, we came to the table, we had common ground, they never followed up and honored it, and we want to know more. And so time has consistently passed, and on the PABJ's end, the Inquirer leadership has been consistently you know, trying to do what I call window dressing of the issue. They have bought tickets to our gala, they went to our fundraiser event, they tried to have this public facing positive, you know, slant, even though behind the scenes, it wasn't that way. And so one of the things that we did, and what my board decided to do, is that we decided to award them a thumbs down award at our gala over the weekend. And many of you all probably saw the viral video and seen TikTok and the different things. And what we did was, they didn't know they were getting the award. We did not tell them. We didn't tell anyone. We didn't even tell members of JAWN. It was a PABJ executive board decision. We didn't tell LinFest, the funders. We didn't tell no one. So what happened was, they came, they bought tickets, they came to the event. You know, they came rather, you know, it was their staff and others. They didn't really talk to the JAWN and much of JAWN. It was very clear that they kind of went, and it was very, you know, subtle. And then all of a sudden, you know, we were, you know, having the meeting, and we were having an event. And, you know, at the beginning of the event, you know, there was remarks from the president, which was myself. I go up, I talk, I'm talking about thanking our sponsors. And then I kind of just say, hey, we're going to present a thumbs down award, which originated from NABJ. Every year, NABJ gives a thumbs down award to a national media company organization who they find to be at odds with the DEI efforts of the organization, or has done something racist. And so PABJ decided to adopt that same type of criteria to give our first ever award to the Philadelphia Inquirer. So the executive editor was there, the VP of DEI was there, and some staff. And we Tauhid handed the award to Gabe Escobar while he was sitting down at the event. And it was an important moment, because that discomfort that leadership felt in that room, we felt like that was the discomfort of Black and brown and Asian journalists that work in that newsroom every day. and have to endure microaggressions or feel like their voices are not heard. And we thought that it was a way for the industry and the media ecosystem to see how serious JAWN was and PABJ is about these issues and really hold their feet to the fire. We have since then followed up and have emailed the managing editor and the executive editor to once again ask for a meeting. We did contact the chair of LNS22 Institute. Her name is Rosalind. She also was contacted by us to ask for a meeting because we really recognize that the LNS Institute has a strong role in this. They are a huge funder and supporter of the Philadelphia Inquirer. They also support our affinity groups. You know, all of us, Vanessa and Jingyao, we serve on the visioning board for LNFest with their projects. And so we knew it was important that we recognize that LNFest Institute has some role or influence in this, and we would like to encourage them to push our efforts on holding them, the Inquirer, more accountable. I mean, they're giving them millions of dollars. We think that they have a role in this. And so yes, Stefanie, exactly. There is a LNFest connection, and we recognize it. And we have we are reaching out to their chair. You know, we do think there might be an opportunity to have a meeting. We do think that there could be a possibility that there will be conversation, but we're asking the larger media ecosystem and everyone from Jersey to Philly that, you know, the Philadelphia Inquirer plays a huge role in our media ecosystem. And what they're doing right now what we're doing in Philadelphia as a group is setting the standard for how other local newsrooms should be held accountable and what we can do as community to do it. What we do here right now in this moment sets the standard for how other newsrooms in small towns and big cities also can feel empowered. And so we take this work very seriously. It's not easy work. It's not always the most glamorous, popular work, but we recognize that if we say nothing, we're going to see a mass exodus of Black and Brown voices.
So we only have 7 minutes left. I want to make a quick statement and then pass it to Jingyao, but I just want to make a couple really strong points. And like the first is like, even in these spaces, when people of color ask questions about racism and diversity, we're often gaslighted and we're given non-answers. And it's really frustrating, especially as a woman of color. Like, don't do that. Don't be defensive. Don't center yourself, and don't avoid the question. Like, this is an open conversation. Groups like ours are here to support you, offer resources, and collaborate. And so when we are asked these questions, it is with the intention of figuring out solutions together. And so what we're often met with is defensiveness and gaslighting, and it's so exhausting, and it makes me not want to come to events like this. So please just like be mindful of how you are responding to journalists of color and people from the community, because we have really big needs. Like, our communities are, by and large, are not being served by most mainstream media outlets. And a lot of the information that you provide is not accessible. And so we do have really high standards for what it means to serve our communities. And saying that you have a diverse staff is like not enough. And so when you say like, oh, we have Black and Brown people and AAI people, on Indigenous people on staff, how long are they staying there? Because the Inquirer has a lot of people of color on staff. They're just not retaining them. And so to answer one of the questions is like, you know, what about this apology? The apology means nothing if, one, that doesn't translate into content and products for our community, right? And there's been a lot of high-priced media projects that have not resulted in content and meeting our information needs. And two, it means nothing if your staff are leaving, right? Or if they're having to get therapy because they're so traumatized by your toxic newsroom. And so the Inquirer's response to saying, well, we're doing well on our DEI efforts, you know, no. And one of the things is like, especially Tauhid and I, like being employees of Free Press, like people call us and tell us what it's like to be in a newsroom, because we're not media competitors, right? And so people feel more comfortable telling us what it's like to negotiate with their white editors and how their story ideas get censored or get killed. projects that they've been working on for months, that, you know, the plug gets pulled on it. And so when we talk about accountability, like I'm just reading from a brainstorm that we had, right, is like, you know, we don't just want more hires of people of color. They also need to be in positions of power where they can make decisions and change policy. We want to see newsrooms acquire the skills to create news products for communities of color by journalists of color. We want to see that these big philanthropic investments in collaborative journalism projects actually meet communities of color's information needs. We want to see more care and support for journalists in these newsrooms who are doing the best that they can under the circumstances, but are not even staying in the field of journalism because their experiences are so toxic. And they have been making all of these same recommendations long before JAWN has. They've just been ignored. And so they've been coming to our organizations for help and support because the unions have been racist and not representing their interests either. And because their editors don't take them seriously and gaslight them as well. There's also the issue of pay equity. We know that journalists of color and women don't get paid money. And we also see from the Temple audit an over-reliance on white men as news sources. And so one of the things the pandemic also taught us is that people need really critical public health information that's often not accessible because of these paywalls. And so there needs to be more of a concerted effort to bring news products to communities of color in the places and the ways in which they consume media. All of these things are the kinds of newsroom accountability that we're seeking. That's not just, oh, well, we're going to hire more Black and brown people. That we're not saying the same thing. And so I just want to make that clarification, because the change that we're seeking at the Inquirer is definitely more expansive than what they're actually responding to.
I think to add to that, we're asking for transformative changes, not performative changes, right? Hiring a VP of DEI and putting funding to increase community-centered pieces, those are very performative actions, right? Performative policies, performative practices, performative activities, that doesn't really result in transformative changes in a way that allows individuals of color to feel safe and are less harmed in their newsrooms and in the power dynamics that exist in their relationships with their editors, as well as the broader leadership, right? And I think that's especially important, you know, when Ernest talked about how, you know, the Inquirer showed up to the fundraiser and bought 10 tickets to the gala. That is performative. That's a performative way of showing up for an affinity group. A transformative way is having difficult conversation and to be challenged and allowing, you know, to really understand the mirror that is being held up in reflection of their practices, their harmful practices. I also want to add, I think, speaking personally as someone who identifies as Asian American, is the way that Asian American Pacific Islanders, or AAPIs, are often positioned in a way to police other communities of color. And I think that's really important to acknowledge the complicity that not just AAPIs in this particular incidents or particular situations, but how communities of color ourselves can be responsible and are accountable when we uphold systems that are harmful and unsafe for fellow individuals of color.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to bring Stefanie and Cassandra back up.
Oh, I was just going to say that I'll put our information in the chat. We want to give a shout out to NJSPJ for making a statement and being in solidarity with us. We are growing the JAWN Coalition. If there are other organizations or movements or communities that want to join with us and support our work, please engage with us. We'd love to hear from you. And if you want to do this type of organizing in your city or town, we can give you the tools and support on how to do that as well. So thank you for the Center for Cooperative Media for giving us this platform. I think it's a really important conversation and we'd love to continue having it with you.